All right, perfect. Well, for those that are here, thank you so much for joining us in our first industry talk of the year, where we have the wonderful Ted Tencza, which is an awesome name, by the way. Do you get called TT for short, or do you have another nickname?
Nope, I'm just Ted.
Just Ted, just Ted. Well, I met Ted last year, end of last year at T-EDI in Brisbane, where he was presenting a talk about technical interview processes, and mostly directed at people in the sector about how they should do that better. But knowing that he has a passion for improving recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of new development, I thought it would be perfect to tell you all about interviews and turn around and see how that is from a candidate perspective. So I'm not going to tell much more, Ted. I'll just leave it up to you. Just for everyone that's here, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A section so we can answer them after Ted's presentation. And yeah, we go through it right then and there.
Okay.
Awesome. You take it away.
Thank you very much. Nice intro. Yes, my name is Ted Tencza. The C is silent. It's a Polish name and it stands for rainbow, which is interesting. And I want to talk to you today about the interview process and go through and talk a little bit about every little aspect of, or not every little aspect of, but a lot of the aspects of it, give it a kind of an overview, and then go through some tips around how to best prepare yourself for the entire interview process, not just the technical interview, but the entire interview process in order to get into sort of software development or things. So a little bit about myself, just so that you know why I'm talking today. I'm the founder of a company called Code Purple Consulting. Interesting fact, I found out later that Code Purple is like a hospital code for a bomb threat. That wasn't why I chose the name. I just like the color purple and I used to code. I've been in the industry since 1997, so I've been here a long time, and I've been doing sort of management and interviewing for probably 18 of those years. And I've set up and done the interview process from this side of the table, where I'm doing, the interviewers, and just changed the whole process a bunch of times at previous companies, and done a lot of training of interviewers, trying to get the interviewers themselves to be much better at finding the correct candidates. And some of the companies I've worked at where I've done sort of interviewing and doing the interview process is Prospa, which is in Sydney, Finder, which was a web comparison website, global, BigCommerce, and at Atlassian. That's where I sort of started this journey of kind of trying to build out a much better interview process, because Atlassian, as successful as it was, had really immature interviewing when I started there, which was way back in sort of 2008. So what is the purpose of an interview? It sounds like that's pretty obvious, right? It's to find the candidates and figure out which one you want to extend an offer to, so you can get the best outcome for your company. Now, the issue is, and I'll go through some of this in a bit, is that interviews, as they are for a lot of companies, don't actually achieve this purpose, because they're done in a bunch of ways that I'll go through and I'll talk about where some of the problems are. But regardless of that, you still have to go through that process. So part of the preparation is going to be talking about what are some of the common pitfalls that you're going to have to be aware of, so that you can sort of navigate your way around those kind of things of interviewers. So the structure of an interview, or the entire process, I'll walk through it now. This is going to be variable because every company does it slightly differently, of course, but I want to go through some of the common themes that you'll most likely kind of see. First, how many interviews you're going to have. Some companies do it very quick. It's like a single interview when you go in, and it's a combination of maybe a coding test and a quick chat with somebody or things like that. Those are typically at sort of much smaller companies. They have much more lean kind of processes. At bigger companies, those numbers start to grow when you get to where you have between 2 and 4 or more. because they've got more people that need to be involved in decisions. They've got, sort of all sorts of other things involved, and basically because they can. And so they want to make sure that their the philosophy is that the more people that are involved in it, the better potential outcome, because you've got more people looking at the data and making the decision. I have seen some companies do as many as like 6 or 8 rounds of interviews. My advice would be to try to, because maybe even avoid those kind of companies, because if that's how inefficient they are, you can imagine what their day-to-day work is like. But again, you may not have a choice. You've got to go through the process that the company has set up, that you don't get to dictate to them, obviously. And there's a number of different types of interviews, and I want to talk a little bit about each of these and just give you some examples of what to expect as you're going through it. I don't know if anybody's already gone through this process a couple of times and already know this. If you have, sorry for the redundancy, but I just want to start from the beginning so that people that haven't had any experience interviewing for technical roles kind of get a feel for what it might look like. First type of interview that I want to talk about is a behavioral interview. And what this is just simply finding out about the candidate as a person, how they think, how they solve problems, those kind of things. So these are the ones where you get the questions like, tell me about a project you've worked on, tell me about, a favorite technology that you have, tell me, hopefully you don't get the old, tell me, what's your weakest trait, those kind of things, but you will get sort of random questions like that. But these kinds are where you really want to sell yourself as basically like a culture fit or a culture add to that, that you are a hard worker, that you concentrate on solving problems, that you're constantly trying to learn, those kind of things. And that's what comes out in the behavior interview. Behavior interviews also are usually used by a lot of companies to sort of sell the company, right? So, hey, you should really come work here. We've got great benefits. We've got, free food. We've got, ping pong tables, or we don't have ping pong tables because that's the culture we want to have. And it's a really good way for you to understand what it would be like working for this, for that particular company. Then you have a technical interview, and this is the one that probably is the deciding factor for a lot of companies on whether or not they're going to continue on with the process with a particular candidate. And the technical interviews usually come in sort of 2 families of technical interviews, for lack of a better term. The first is some sort of like a coding test. And these can vary greatly across companies. You can have something that is a pseudocode on a whiteboard. You can have doing an application from scratch, just getting a blank piece of paper and saying, hey, build me something, an API, or query an API and return the values, or things like that with basically a blank slate. You might get something that's more of a debugging exercise where there's code that already exists and you have to make the test pass because either they have incorrect parameters or some other random bugs that you need to go in and find. And the idea behind this is that's what a wide variety of, or most sort of jobs entail a lot more of that than they do of writing something from scratch. The other is sort of a technical design or system level design kind of interview. And these are the ones where they'll say, if you want to build a system, how would you do it? How would you structure your database? Would you put it on AWS? Would you use Kubernetes? Would you do any of these other things? And you have to sort of talk through how you would build the system, and importantly, why you would build it that way. Right. You don't want to build something that's like a super simple thing on a really complex architecture, because then, they're going to think that you're over designing it. Now, for junior level or entry level and junior level sort of coding jobs, you're probably not going to get asked a ton of stuff around like sort of deep architecture questions, but you still should sort of have a general understanding of how things plug together and be able to say, I'd want to call an API, I'd want to do this, I'd want to do that, and really kind of understand what it is that ties everything together. You may end up with a panel interview. Again, it's not as prevalent as it used to be, but you might end up, in front of 3, 4, 5 people where you're doing like a case study or showing them something like that. And then there's also the take-home tests, and I have my own personal hatred for take-home tests, but that's I won't let that influence the talk too much. But these are the things where it's like they use HackerRank or LeetCode or something like that, and you get a link in an email that says, you know, please take this test and submit it, and then they go through and the whatever sort of take-home test it is. If it's a prepackaged one, they'll get a report on how you did. If it's their own personal designed one, they'll have somebody review it and give you answers. And then you get a bunch of different ways that they're going to make the decisions. And so while that doesn't necessarily impact you as far as prepping for the interview, it's good to know because it's going to impact how you get the feedback. If it's, you know, the people that are on the interview making the decision in kind of real time, you'll probably get a feedback much quicker. But believe it or not, there are some companies that, you know, the people that aren't in the interview also have a say in whether or not the decision is higher or no higher. And they'll do that by reading the notes and making sure that, you know, the facilitating the discussion around sort of all of the interviewers, and you get kind of a group consensus rather than a series of gates. So if you've got individual ones, you'll get like a series of gates. It'll be go, no go, go, no go, go, no go. If you get a panel, you'll probably have to do the whole thing, and then they'll all get together and do it. So you'll have much longer feedback loops around there. So you should be prepared for that. Yeah, I just went through that. Okay. Now I want to talk to you about some of the things that you're going to have to navigate around as you're doing this thing. And it's good to know these things simply because, like, it's better to be prepared that these things might happen rather than just sort of going in blind and hoping that everything works perfectly. First off, as I sort of said, there's quite a bit of problems in the process, and I'm not going to get too much into that, but that was sort of the whole talk I did at T-EDI Brisbane, which is sort of why I'm here. And that is, you know, and I'll go through some of them, but basically a lot of interview processes aren't set up to find the best candidate. They're set up based on, you know, sort of what other people have done in the past, or, you know, this is how I did it, so I'm just going to keep going that way. And the other thing I want to really get across here is there is no one right answer to all of this stuff I'm telling you about prepping and preparing for the interview, because many companies are very different, and somebody can be looking for different things and different types of answers. So, you know, what I'm looking for in a candidate is going to be very different than what somebody else is going to be looking for. And so all I can say is that, you know, just be aware of that. And, you know, if you follow the advice and don't get a role, it may be that just the advice was bad, because it wasn't bad per se. It was just not applicable to that new company that you're interviewing with. You will have, for a lot of these roles, you will have one role with multiple candidates. So, you know, most or everyone but one will be rejected. That's not always the case. There are some companies that have like sort of incoming cohorts, or, you know, graduate programs where they hire, you know, 20 people at a time, those kind of things. But don't get too discouraged if you don't get sort of the first role or the first couple roles, because again, you're probably in company with a lot of people who didn't get the role because you have it, and these can get to extremes. When I was working at Atlassian, we had a recruiting drive, and we had 15 openings, and we had 900 candidates for 15 openings. And so obviously there were, you know, well over 800 people that were disappointed. It happens. Interviewers are very different, right? So what I look for, what the other person looks for, you know, can be very, very varied. And there's no way for you to know that ahead of time, but you should be aware of it so you can, you know, start to learn about the different types of things and start to read the clues on what they're looking for. You know, it's a bit of a lottery. Sometimes you get interviewers that will make decisions based on completely arbitrary information. I've had people in the past that I know of where they would say, okay, you've used a keyboard, you know, you didn't use keyboard shortcuts, you used the mouse, so therefore I'm going to say no, right? Just completely irrelevant factors, but it happens. There's also variability of experience. So sometimes you're going to get interviewers that are very inexperienced, and they might be new at interviewing, and it can make for a very awkward experience, as they're asking sort of really random questions, or they're all over the shop and things like that. So you just have to be aware of that, and there's really not a lot you can do. You can't give them experience, but at least recognize that, if it's really awkward, it might not be you, it might be them. And you also have a lot of variability of training of interviewers. There's a lot of sort of companies out there that think that, okay, well, you've coded for 10 years, so you should be able to figure out who else can code. And it doesn't quite work that way. They're very different kind of skill sets. You can have issues with communication, whether it's like the company is slow to get back to you with feedback. It might be the fact that the person who is doing the interview is not the best communicator, and so you get sort of very, very limited feedback, especially if you're in a candidate pool with a lot of applicants. Don't expect to get detailed feedback on why you may not have been successful. Most of the time you'll get some generic kind of stuff. That's just the way it is. Don't pin your hopes on sort of expecting that each interview you go through, they'll give you enough feedback that you'll be able to improve for the next one. You probably won't get a ton of feedback. And there's a lot of effort for little value for you at the beginning of the process. So a lot of companies will, you hit apply and you'll get an auto-generated email with a link to a take-home test or an online quiz or something like that. So the company hasn't put in any effort, and they're getting all the value because they get to find out which candidates have the ability to at least pass that first level. The more senior you get, and the more you can sort of drive that the other way and say, I'm not putting an effort till you show me value for the company. Flip side of that is, the bigger the company and the better the name of the company, the more they can sort of do it, because more people will be willing to jump through hoops. If you're applying for Google, expect to jump through a lot of hoops, because they're Google, and a lot of people want to work for them. If you're applying for a startup and they're doing this, you might want to look at other options. And the certifications are a bit interesting in that some companies really, really value them. And so it's like, you really want to have the certifications up front and center, so it gets you in front of the interview panel. Other companies don't care. And that means that you really don't know kind of how much value you're going to get out of investing the time and effort into certifications. And that includes sort of later on in your career, getting various AWS certifications or security certifications or whatnot. So just be aware of that, and don't expect to sit there and go, okay, I've got like 6 certifications now, people are going to be knocking down my door to try to get me a job, because it doesn't work that way. So what are some tips? I've told you a lot about the bad things. What are some of the good things? First off, on your CV and cover letters and getting the interview, what I would say is highlight outcomes over output. And I was discussion before the thing started was that I understand that Code Academy does a lot of work around helping you with your CVs and your cover letters and doing stuff like that. So I don't want to get too much into it, but the things that I always look for is outcomes over outputs. And what I mean by this is, if you say that you have a web, and you say, okay, I built a website, and it's like, yeah, that's what most people do when they're in a web development role. So that doesn't tell me anything. What you want to do is the outcome. Built a website that performed 15% better than the one that the company had, or was able to handle so many concurrent users without degradation of performance, or something like that. So you really want to highlight what value and outcome you brought over just what you did. You can occasionally want to use like the JD to help craft it. So if the JD is specific about, hey, we really want this particular technology or skill set or something like that, and you have it, make sure you highlight it, because that's what you're going to be applying for. And then the other one I would say is just sort of, and this one I think is a little bit controversial, and so if you don't sort of follow it, that's fine, but I like to, when people explain sort of anomalies in the thing. So if you've got like a 2-year gap you know, and you feel comfortable explaining why, just sort of, you know, put it in there as what you did in those 2 years. If you've got a bunch of jobs that are like 6 months, you've got 4 or 5 6-month jobs because they were all contracts, put it in there that you were doing contract work, and it sort of eases some of the people who get a little antsy over various anomalies in a CV. Be present when you're doing an interview. Don't, especially now that so many of them are over Zoom or, you know, whatever other sort of medium. Don't sit there and try to do something else, right? Get into a room, shut doors if you can, block out everything. Don't answer emails, don't be texting, because the last thing you want to do is like have them ask a question and you missed it because you were focused on answering a quick email, and it's, you know, it's going to really make a bad impression on it. So you want to be there in the interview. Understand the format. Now, remember when I was talking about the coding interviews, there's so much variety in what it could be. Take some time, ask some questions, and try to actually understand the format that you're going to be going into. That will help you sort of mentally prepare. It can also help you sort of do some pre-work and some prep work if you need to. And it'll also answer a lot of the questions. And that's what you really want to do. And it'll help you be more confident going into an interview if you sort of know what's coming, rather than saying, okay, I'm going into a coding interview and I have no idea if I'm going to be debugging or writing code from scratch or doing pseudocode or any of this other stuff, because then you've got to think on your feet a lot more. So, you know, and part of this is asking questions both before and during, right? So if they say, you know, query an API, this, you know, you can ask them, okay, is it more important that we get, you know, the multiple results, or is it more important that it's, you know, doesn't use up a whole lot of computing resources, or, you know, what kind of things are you looking for? And those are perfectly acceptable questions to ask, because those are the kind of questions you would ask in the day-to-day working of the job. Be clear on the rules of the interview. So, you know, ask them ahead of time, you know, do I have to have a specific IDE? Do I have to use a specific language? Do I need to do it on sort of your hardware versus my hardware? Am I allowed to, you know, do Stack Overflow or Google or you know, some sort of predictive AI and everything? And if they say no, don't try to hide it in the background with a second window or something like that, because it does become painfully obvious, and that's almost an instant disqualification. But most places will have you being able to do things that you would be able to do in your day-to-day work. And if they don't let you do that, that's, you know, again, that's a sign of kind of what kind of company they are. Research the company, right? So understand what they do, at least at a high level. You don't need to go, you know, super deep into it, but at least know that, hey, okay, I'm applying for a company and they're a bank, or they're a web comparison site, or something like that, because you would be surprised at how many candidates go in and they've just been, you know, shotgunning interviews, and they go in and they don't even know what the company does. They don't even know what their main product is. And while I don't like companies that are super egotistical, that expect you to have done, you know, a dissertation on their history, you do want to at least have some basic information about it to show that you cared about the company and enough about the interview. If they tell you who the interviewer is, do a little bit of research on them. That can also help you understand, are they, you know, highly technical, or are they managerial, or are they product, or things like that. And that can also help you with how you answer the question. And especially if you're doing something like a behavioral interview where they may have non-technical people in there, then you know that you know, you might need to explain things in a little bit more detailed terms and everything, without being sort of condescending, because a lot of companies will put a non-technical person in there because and this is much more for sort of senior developers, that they'll start talking down to them, and you can really see sort of the contempt that they have for non-technical people. And that's a big no for many organizations. You should always treat everyone with respect, but just if you know ahead of time, you can phrase your answers a lot more on point. Have some questions ready for them, right? You want to find out what it's going to be like working there. You know, are you going to have a training budget? Are you going to have opportunities for travel? Are you going to have the ability to refuse travel if you need to? And you don't want to get too much into the HR side of things. Like, you know, travel is probably not the best example, because that one you would probably want to talk to HR about. But ask them about, you know, sort of, do they do a lot of pair programming? Do they have, you know, can you have your own IDEs? You know, what are their guidelines? Prep some answers. You're going to get, as you go through these, you'll start to see there's a lot of questions that come kind of, you know, over and over again, especially in the behavioral side of it. You know, tell me about something you've worked on. Explain, you know, a particular system design, those kind of things. Once you start to see a pattern of ones that you're being asked, start thinking of your answers ahead of time. Some people like to write cheat sheets. I don't, because I think if it looks like you're reading off a script, it can be kind of a bit of a turnoff. But just start thinking about what kinds of things, you know, have a project in mind that you want to discuss. Understand what the trade-offs were on that project. Be able to tell them why you did what you did, not just what you did, but why you did what you did. Be prepared to just sort of drill down into, you know, technical decisions that you've made. Be prepared to say, you know, how do you keep up on industry standards, and, you know, those kind of things. You'll see those a lot. So don't try to think on your feet every single time. Be ready. And you can do this by using the JD, right? So you can have the JD and say, okay, they're going to probably ask me, you know, this thing is a DevOps role, so they're probably going to ask me about a CI/CD pipeline. So get ready to answer about how you would design one, or, you know, how you would go about evaluating if one was effective, those kind of things. And then practice. All right, whether it's with friends, by yourself in front of a mirror, just sort of get used to speaking out loud and answering the questions in a comprehensive way. I know a couple people, it's not something that I personally would do, but I know a lot of people that basically interview a lot of times, even if they don't want the job, simply so they can get the practice of doing the interview. I personally find that is, you know, it doesn't respect other people's time. It's not a good respect of your time, but I can see why people do it, in order to sort of keep in the game and everything. And occasionally they might even find one that they didn't think they would like, that they did. And then lastly, sort of have an online presence, and you should be doing this with Coder Academy. I think they're going to be helping you, having a GitHub repo that's public, looking at potentially, you know, trying to look at some open source kind of things, or stuff like that. Because, and I understand that not everybody has the time to do this. You know, it definitely favors a very specific cohort of developers. Unfortunately, that cohort of developers gets in front of a lot of the interviewers who are looking for that kind of thing. Somebody who's like, oh, you know, I don't have any care responsibilities. I'm not worried about taking my kids to sport on the weekend. Instead, I'm, you know, writing code every weekend. Some people don't like to do that. Some people just don't like to, you know, when they clock off, they want to just go home and, you know, play music or do sport, or whatever. But if you have the opportunity to, I would suggest doing something where you have an online presence. And that's it. That's what I have. So I guess we can now open it up for questions, comments, anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I put in a little tip there as well in the chat for students when it came to the outcomes over output. If you haven't read it yet, for those doing a placement, and if you have a look at your latest resume that you sent to the partnerships team, have a look at that. And if you actually have put those outcomes in there, because that's an excellent tip, and that's something that you can quickly fix if you haven't done that yet, and then just send me an updated version. Okay, looking at the Q&A, at this stage there's only one question in there, so if you have some questions, please pop them in there. We'll just start with the first one, and hopefully we'll get some more after that. So someone is asking, if you're inexperienced or don't pass the technical coding test, can you still be successful by showing your portfolio?
Most likely not. The problem with showing the portfolio is that they don't have any information on how you got about getting that portfolio, right? Did you have a lot of assistance with it? Did you have, is it something that was like templated that you just sort of filled in the outer edges kind of thing? So if you end up not passing the coding test, start to figure out, why do you need to get more skilled? Do you need to look at getting a role that uses a different set of technologies or a different stack or something like that? But it's very rare for people to be hired based solely on their portfolio, especially if they weren't able to produce that same level of standards in a live interview. And we all understand that there is a possibility that people are nervous and they seize up, and sometimes they will take that into consideration, but that's few and far between. I mean, really few and far between.
So, and then a follow-up question to that, how would you approach a tech question that you didn't know the answer to at the start?
First off is ask for clarification. Maybe it's just worded poorly or everything. Don't claim experience and knowledge that you don't have, because they'll see through it, right? So if you sit there and say, oh, well, yeah, because I did a whole bunch of stuff on writing my own little AI LLM or something like that, you're invariably going to end up with somebody who's like an expert at that, and they're going to drill into it, and it's going to be pretty obvious pretty quickly. But ask for questions. Just say, I haven't had any experience with that. I'm willing to learn. Is there a different way I can show that? And sometimes if they're hiring, sort of entry-level programmers, they should be a little bit more flexible and say, okay, well, if you can't do that, can you do this? Or what kinds of things, do you have experience doing? And then they can dig into that, especially if it's a company that is really set up to help support and grow junior developers into sort of mid-levels and seniors, and really nurturing environment. But just ask.
Yeah, and I think what really helps as well is think of yourself, what are they actually asking of me? What is the problem? And then try to break that down. Okay, so is, back to the basics. Are all the basics working? Is it working? Is that something I need to create? Is it something I need to fix? Is it something that is not there, that is not existing? But I think a lot of the time what they're asking for as well is that you verbalize those thoughts, because it's then again about, okay, how does your mind process a problem like that, and how are you going to solve it? And that gives a lot of insights into how you tackle a problem, I guess, even if you don't know the answer to it. Sometimes you can get away with just verbalizing that thought process, and they can help you get on the way to get to the answer.
The other thing I would suggest is, again, sort of going back to sort of understanding the rules and what you're allowed to do. Ask them if can I Google it and then explain to you how, once I've Googled it, I would know how to do it, or can I go onto Stack Overflow and get a quick answer? Because a lot of times people do that in their day job anyway, right? And just seeing an answer on Stack Overflow, you still need to know how to kind of do it. You can't just copy and paste it, because the context will be different. No question is going to be exactly the same. And so if you can say, well, here's what the senior developer on Stack Overflow did, I would look at this, but here's what I think, where I think it would have to change. I would say, instead of doing this, we would want to focus more on this particular area. Like, they worried so much about performance, but from what your question sounded like, it sounded like it was only going to be used internally and not have a whole lot of traffic. Therefore, I wouldn't focus so much on performance. I would focus on usability, and just showing that you're thinking about how you would solve the problems can help a long way.
Yeah, exactly. Another question came from Matt. He says, what is the best way to practice the code and test?
Go onto some of the online places and just practice it. So there's LeetCode, there's HackerRank, there's a couple other code things that basically just give you some of these generic questions. They are heavily focused towards computer science algorithm type questions, where you'll get, do a bubble sort or reverse a string in place, all these kind of things that you'll never do in your day job. But unfortunately, there's a lot of companies out there that use these kind of tools. And so it's not going to be in sort of, that was my whole rant at T-EDI Brisbane, is that they're, interviewing for things that are going to be completely unrelated to what you're going to be doing in your day job. But if they're going to be using it, it really behooves you to be able to use it, right? Especially if it's like an in-person interview. You don't want to go into an in-person interview and have them sort of call up LeetCode and you spend the first 10 minutes trying to find where the edit button is, and wasting your time there. So practice on, there's so many online tools out there, and they'll score it and they'll, tell you how, did you do it, 20% faster than average or 20% slower than average or any of these other things. All of it is irrelevant information, but all of it will help you in the interview, which is what you want.
And you guys are doing Kahoots as well, right, in your classes? So I think those help as well. Hopefully, if I get that right. Okay, so next question is it okay to reach out to hiring managers directly on LinkedIn?
It depends. Whoever is sort of the follow the process that the company has set up for it, right? So, if I've got a job out and I've got 100 candidates coming in for it, and I've got a TA screening process that we're trying to follow so that everybody gets a fair shot, getting 60 LinkedIn things is just going to make me angry rather than sort of get you ahead in the thing. So, but if they advertised on LinkedIn and they talk about coming out, then yes, it's acceptable. So I would sort of just try to gauge what the rules of the process are and everything. So it can actually hurt you if you reach out to somebody who just is swamped with stuff and it just rubs them the wrong way.
Yeah.
And again, sort of back to my very first point is that everything is different. It would upset me. It might not upset the other person. So my advice might be completely off. It depends on sort of who you're getting it for. So I as with everything, it depends.
Then we have a question again from Tom in the Q&A. How do interviewers view experience with old legacy software, and how can you use it for your benefit?
Depends on the interviewer, depends on the company. One thing is that it shows that you've got experience solving problems, right? The language is not as important for most interviewers as the ability to solve the problem. So being able to show that you were took a problem and were able to code a solution to it, even if it's in Cobalt or Pascal or punch cards, whatever. Being able to show that you have that ability to solve problems. When I first started coding way back in 97, I used a language that probably no one's ever heard of unless you were very specifically in this one, in government industries.
Which one?
Called Natural.
Natural.
And it's a 4G language. It's very similar to sort of Cobalt and that. But when I left that job and went to another job, because no one else uses that except for government, so went into private sector, I couldn't show that I had skill with their particular language, but I could show that I had the ability to pick up a language quickly and that I had the ability to solve a problem. And I had other skills that were just as important. I could design a database effectively. I could understand how to do methodology and the whole SDL software development life cycle. I could show them that I was cognizant of testing and how I made sure that my code was of highest quality, and then I'll figure out the syntax. I mean, a good engineer, we have to learn new languages all the time anyway.
Yeah.
And everything, the stuff that you're coding today, if you're still in the industry 10 years, you're going to be coding on something else, or you're going to be in a dead-end job. Those are the only two sort of options. So just show that you know how to learn. That's how I would benefit from legacy.
Yeah. There's no questions at this stage, but I do have a question. I found that some partner and new people, like industry partners, we try to get more and more industry partners for our students to do an industry placement after they finish their course. And some of them I find are very outdated when they say, no, we only want people that have a bachelor degree in computer science. Do you think you need a bachelor degree in computer science to be a successful developer?
Well, I hope you don't, because I don't have one. So I'm really hoping that I can become successful after 25 years. So companies that do that, I think, are misguided, because the role itself, there are some jobs where it's important. If you're developing sort of day trading algorithm application that requires super fast and absolutely 100% correct algorithms, most of the time you're only going to get that type of training and understanding if you've done a computer science degree. So there are, but those are few and far between and everything. So I would just instead show that you have the ability to learn, show that you have the ability to, basically pick things up. And, I can't make those companies understand that that's a stupid requirement, but I do know that it is. The other thing I would say, and that is, if you're seeing a job where it says that for entry level and you don't have one, apply anyway. Right? Be upfront that you don't have it, but apply anyway, because most of the time those things are auto-generated JDs from HR, and the hiring manager won't give a if you have a computer science degree or not. Every job that I've had in Australia, except for my last two, the requirement was have a computer science degree, master's preferred. And I've never seen the inside of a computer science classroom in my life. I have a history degree.
I love this. History.
Yes. If you ever want a cure for insomnia, read my master's thesis.
Oh, there you go. Nice. And so how are you all self-taught? Did you?
I got lucky in that I got a placement with a company that basically trained. And so the first 6 months of employment was all training, because they were so desperate for getting developers. Again, like I said, it was this language that no one had ever heard of. So having a computer science degree didn't really help anything. So we got in there and we spent the first 6 months just learning this language and the syntax and the systems and things like that. And then graduated into production level code. And this company also was the University of Texas at Austin. One was government, so they weren't super worried about profitability, so they could afford to invest in people. And two, everyone in this company had sort of a variety of backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds. So I've basically, had that kind of prejudice against going for, just computer science degrees, because I've worked in organizations where everybody had a non-traditional background and it worked.
And there you go, guys. Everyone listening here, you all have non-traditional backgrounds. You're all career changers. And this guy made it work. The previous speaker that was there last month made it work. The one that made it was Justin Hennessy. He did a talk about AI. He has not got a degree. He's completely self-taught. And they're all CTO levels. You can make it work as well if you want to get there.
There's been a lot of studies around, especially with juniors and people from underrepresented groups, who tend to sort of not apply for jobs because they don't tick every box on the JD. Don't fall into that trap. If you see a job that you like and it's like close, if you've got 50%, 60%, go ahead and apply, because it may be that they're willing to make some concessions for somebody who's like an eager learner or a hard worker, or really fits into the personalities and exuberance that they want to bring into the organization. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice from the application standpoint, is ignore the requirements if you don't have all of them. Now, if you don't have any of them, you're probably wasting time applying. But ignore degree requirements, ignore something like, if you've got 2 years and it says we need 3+ years, ignore it. They'll do 2 years. 3+ years doesn't mean anything. You don't know what they've learned in those 3 years. You can convince them that in your 2 years, you've learned 4 years worth of stuff. I interviewed a candidate once that had 8 years of experience, and drilling down into it, they really had a single year of experience that they just repeated 8 times. They hadn't progressed, they hadn't learned, they hadn't done anything. So that 8+ years, to me, I discounted. And so, it's how you sell yourself in that interview.
Yeah, exactly. So we have another question here. How do interviewers view certificates in general? And I think that's not just certificate, but I mean like diplomas and degrees, I think. He means in that as well. So just, certificate in general. How are they being viewed?
So I'm not quite sure I understand what they mean by certificate. Do you mean like certifications, or do you mean like degrees or?
Can you clarify? Coursera certificates.
Oh, okay. I
AWS certificates, yeah, just
yeah. So certifications and that kind of thing. I think it again, it depends on the interviewer. It won't carry much weight after getting you in front of the panel, right? So what it can help is it can help you get an interview because they can see that you've done these kind of things and they say, okay, they probably have some experience in this area and it might get you in front of the interview. But once you're there, you still have to solve now the problems that the company has and being able to answer the interview questions and the coding questions and stuff like that. So again, that's sort of like one of the very early questions about trying, if you bomb the interview, but you've got a really good portfolio. I think the same sort of advice applies around certifications and certificates and things like that. It'll get you in front of them. They'll look at it. But if you can't do the technical tests or the design tests that they want you to do, then it's not going to help.
yeah. In regards to the tests, when it comes to placements, we obviously have some influence as the partner of the industry, the company that we work with. And we tell them as well, look, this is the first time they have not done this before, and there is some leeway there. Then the ones that do decide to do a technical interview, a lot of the time, they will not let you create code on a whiteboard or from scratch. It is either find the bugs, find existing code, find the faults in it, or yeah, that's actually a lot of the time that's one of those, the most used one, I think, for juniors.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is some, but a lot of companies don't do it either because a lot of them don't see the value in it. Especially for juniors, more senior levels, they will go in deeper and deeper questions. But if you're just starting out, they know you're graduate, they know you're still learning, they know you just, got to consolidate all your skills that you just been taught. So in that sense, yes, be prepared, but don't let it overtake you. Don't be scared for it. Yeah, it just is. It's good. And they're just going to learn more about you. So don't be nervous for an interview. You're just having a talk with a person that wants to get to know you better, pretty much, and how you think.
Yeah, and really good interviewers at good companies will sort of make sure that candidate cares at kind of the forefront of it and making sure that you're relaxed, that you've got the information that you need. On-site interviews, which aren't as prevalent anymore, but making sure that you've got a glass of water, things like that. The other thing I would say is, especially at a junior level, is when you're taking the technical test or when you're talking the system, one, as I said earlier, ask questions, but two, also explain what you're doing, like verbalize. And I know that's very difficult for a lot of people. I get it. I hate doing it. But if you can sort of verbalize to the interviewer, I'm doing this because, I think that, performance is the most important thing, or I think that, usability is the most important thing, or whatever it is, then even if you do it slightly wrong, if they know that you were trying to get it right and they can give you minor corrections and you can get it right, that's a way to sort of overcome not understanding or not being able to do it right off the bat.
Yeah. And to those that are really, scared of speaking up or find that really difficult, there is also a way of logging what you're doing and then explain it afterwards. If you find it hard to speak as you're going because there's too many things happening at once, try to log what you're doing and then explain it afterwards if that helps.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that or not?
Yeah.
Mm.
Actually, I know there's one technical recruiting place down in Sydney that actually is helping people sort of prep for these kind of things and also getting the companies involved. And what they do is they do like an online coding test. But at the end of the coding test, they record a Loom video where the candidate goes through and explains why they did what they did, because that adds context rather than just, dry code, because, there's all kinds of reasons why you might have made a decision. And if the person doesn't know that that's what you were thinking, which is very difficult to do in a take-home test, then that does it. So, not every company will accept it. They might just take the computerized automated results and that's it. If so, you're kind of out of luck. But a lot of companies will, and you can sit there and say, this is my thought process, this is what I was thinking, this is why I made these decisions. And that counts in my book for a lot rather than just writing the code.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Were there any last questions at all? Because I think we've gone through pretty much all of them. Do you have anything to add on, Ted, that you feel like this might be good to know? I think you said pretty much everything, but you might
Yeah.
have something like, oh yeah, think
Yeah,
about
I
people.
can't think of anything else other than don't get discouraged. There's a lot of rejection coming up, even for the best developers, even for most experienced things. And you're going to occasionally have a bad day. I had a interview once where I was interviewing for basically this, VP of engineering role, so very high technical role. And I was talking about some of the projects I'd done, and all of a sudden I blanked, and I couldn't even remember that, like, I had done a API call and the response was formatted in JSON, and I couldn't even say that. I mean, I was that much of my brain had just sort of disappeared for that day. It happens. So how do you, I think I saw something in the chat, how do you handle rejection? Each person
Yes.
needs to, do what's best for them. Don't take it personally. Try to understand why it was rejected. It may be just because, somebody was just a little bit better, and there's not much you can do about that. But you know, attempt to get feedback. You're going to get, a lot of very vague feedback around that because people just don't like telling people why they suck. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But,
It's
no,
true.
yeah, but it's just the fact that it just do what you need to do to take care of your own mental health and get in a good space. Whether that's, go for a run, pet your dog, have a nice cup of tea or a nice cup of coffee, and then immediately do it again. So I, sort of, like I said, I spoke at DDD Brisbane, but I've applied for probably, 60 conferences to speak at for these things, and I've gotten accepted to like 8 of them, which means I've had 52 rejections and everything, but I'm still applying because I understand that, they've got, 8 speaking slots and 200 people going for the conference. They can't accommodate everybody. So I don't take it personally and I just go on to the next conference.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Especially for career changers. What I see is the people that give up tend to go back to their old careers. You go back to the jobs that you actually want to get out of because you're investing in yourself by doing this course. You invested $20,000 in this course to become a developer. Those that give up on becoming a developer go back to their old jobs and they stop coding. And that is just such a shame. And that's such a waste. Don't give up. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on coding. If you do have to go back, obviously everyone needs to make money and make a living. If you find it hard to get that first job, try to keep coding on the side. Make projects, find your classmates, create something together. Just keep going at it, and don't forget to keep applying and keep yourself busy with that to keep that knowledge present. And the ones that do attend the networking events that we tell you, that do put the presence online through GitHub, but LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn known. You just gotta know the rules of the game, pretty much. LinkedIn can be very valuable if you know how to use it properly. There is a lot of noise in there. There's a lot of a look at me and I've done this and that's fantastic, but there is a lot of knowledge there as well, and a lot of right people that still want to help you. You just got to find them and find those connections, because the connections will help you find your job. And if you have a chance, go to face-to-face events, because those face-to-face events will give you so much more chance of meeting the right people and getting that foot in the door. Yeah, so that's tips from my side. Anything you wanted to add on to that?
No, it's very true. Don't, if you do get placements and everything, don't burn bridges when you leave, even if it wasn't the most pleasant experience, because you never know when you're going to run into some of those people again. The role that I currently have right now with a big corporate client I have, as their CTO. I got, because my previous company, I met the CFO, and I was, very, very close with the CFO, and now he's the lead investor for the VC firm that's funding this particular app. So when they said, hey, we're on the lookout for a CTO, he called me. And so it was like, I didn't even apply for them. They came to me. And that's unusual. It's not going to happen as a junior, but it shows you the value of making sure that you keep those relationships healthy.
Yeah. And it can happen because it has happened to juniors before. Once you build those connections, there is a student, this is an example I use every time. There's a student that went to a hackathon from a company here in Brisbane. And the funny thing is, I presented that same student in a list of profiles for a placement at that same company. They did not reply. They said, no, we are not looking for someone right now. We don't have the budget for it. But that student, one of those students, she showed up at the hackathon and they got talking. And because of that, they were like, hey, we're going to invite her for an interview. And I'm like, well, her profile's been sent to you 3 weeks ago. There you go. They didn't want anyone, but because they met her face to face, she was suddenly and they hired her in the end, which was really cool. And like, oh, that happens. Make sure to be present when you can. Look up in the area, go and meet up, see what there is from the local language meetups. There is React meetups, there's Python meetups. There is always some companies that organize meetups that will be able to help you meet some people that are helping you in the right direction for building those connections and building out your network. Yeah. All right, that's it for me. It's 6 p.m. in Brisbane, 7 p.m. in Melbourne, Sydney, and Tasmania. So that means you guys probably have class right now for those that have, and everyone else that's done. Thank you so much for joining again. Thank you so much, Ted, for taking time out of your day to do this and to pass on this information. It was super valuable, super helpful, and I hope you had a good time as well, that you enjoyed speaking to our students.
Yes. Good luck, everybody, in your job searches.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.